In 1990, deep within a murky basement of Building 14, on an island not too far from Connecticut, a woman named Frances Demorest worked to incinerate files. Presumably, these files were the smoking gun that there really was something nefarious and illegal happening at Plum Island. Tonight, you're in for a treat. This video was first released on TSO September 5th, 2023. You know, as of yet, I still haven't seen any of the bigger channels do anything on Frances Demorest.
Maybe that's because we don't have time to watch other channels.
True. She'll come back into our report near the end of this video. If you're new here, we share quality information about unexplainable events.
Yeah, and currently we're sharing the more interesting reports from our now defunct channel, TSO.
This one, of course, is about the laboratories at Plum Island.
And one last thing, many channels are starting to use AI voices to narrate their videos. I think people want the real thing. Well, here we have him, and his voice is amazing. We'll never use an AI voice for our commentator.
Wow. Thank you, babe.
You're welcome. It is true. Now, please enjoy the report.
Plum Island is no longer an active government laboratory, but while it was, all sorts of rumors came out about how it was working on horrible, inhuman projects. These rumors ranged from the mundane to the fantastical. Some people say that it was a place where mad scientists played with DNA to create a new species, like the Montauk Monster. Some say that it was a place where evil people experimented on humans, trying to create the perfect super soldier. Others say that it was a biological warfare laboratory where chemicals were developed to rip humans apart from the inside. And there are, of course, those who say that it was exactly what the government said that it was, a laboratory to study and eradicate diseases. This video is just going to be a quick history of Plum Island. We'll examine the hearsay and the what-ifs. We'll take you through the government's official statement as to why they say that the facility was opened in the first place. And we'll share with you the chilling process that was used to open it. This information had me do a double take. And if you're not aware of how this facility began, it just might raise your eyebrows. Then we'll spend the bulk of our time on the rumors and the speculations of what the island was actually used for. And of course, as we do so, we'll look for any evidences that just might back up some of those rumors and speculations. And then, since the facility has been shut down and the laboratories have been moved, I'll give you its new address. You may be surprised to discover where they moved it to. And even if only half of the information in this video is true, and the laboratories have moved anywhere near you, well, you may want to move. So, this report actually begins on another island, Reams Island, in the 1940s. During World War II, a man named Erich Traub, a Nazi, worked as a lab chief for the Nazis' leading bioweapons facility on Reams Island, Germany. There, he created and perfected biowarfare chemicals. One of the diseases that he worked on weaponizing was called foot and mouth disease. Traub became an expert in this disease, and the Germans actually used it on their enemies. They dispersed it from aircraft. They actually dropped loads of infected ticks, now remember that for later, out of airplanes onto Russian animals. The thought, of course, was to infect the animals and thereby take away the Russians' food supply. Well, after the war, get this, the United States government arranged for Traub to avoid standing trial for his crimes against humanity if he would just agree to be brought to the United States and to work as a major consultant on a brand new laboratory that the government wanted to open. And if you guessed that that laboratory was the one on Plum Island, well, you're right. The United States government established the Plum Island Animal Disease Center in 1954, and the official reason for opening the facility was to act as a defense against, and I quote directly from the government's own webpage, accidental or intentional introduction of transboundary animal diseases or foreign animal diseases, including foot and mouth disease and African swine fever. Now, incidentally, in the 60 plus years that the labs were there on the island, they never did find a cure to either one of those diseases. Traub not only helped to set up the facility and organize the labs on Plum Island, but he also visited the facility on at least 3 different occasions. Of course, this was just to make sure that things were running according to plan. Through the years, there have been numerous rumors and speculations about nefarious and strange activities associated with Plum Island. And as with most of our reports, we just don't have enough time to go through all of the information that my beautiful woman dug up. So we're only going to look at a few different cases. The first 3 cases have to do with the development and distribution of biologically engineered viruses, something that is, of course, against the law in nearly every country of the world. And then we're going to look at some rumors that have to do with, well, something else. We'll start with the viruses, and then we'll leave the strange stuff for last. On Long Island in the late 1960s, the duck industry was booming. Roasted, marinated Long Island duck was a popular dish all across the United States. Then, in the second half of 1967, a duck farmer found that a number of his ducks had just died for no reason. Well, shortly after that, ducks in nearby farms began dying as well. And by December of 1967, over half of the duck population on Long Island farms were dead, and many others were trembling and barely able to stand. In order to stop this outbreak from spreading, over 6,000 ducks had to be killed and 50,000 eggs had to be destroyed. The disease was found to be caused by a virus that was creatively called the duck plague virus. It was also known as duck viral enteritis. Now, the world's introduction to this virus was actually in 1923 in the Netherlands, which of course is far from the United States. And up until this case on Long Island, the virus had never been reported in the United States. Well, because of its proximity to Plum Island and some questionable statements that were made by some officials there on the island, many people believe that this virus was intentionally weaponized at Plum Island, and then a test run of its effectiveness was carried out on the Long Island ducks nearby. Officially, of course, the government denied these accusations, stating that there was no way that the plague could have originated from Plum Island because they didn't start studying the virus until after this outbreak occurred. In the 1970s, Cuba's president, Fidel Castro, accused the United States of waging germ warfare on Cuba. Well, everyone thought that he was just spouting off, making stuff up. Well, you decide. In April of 1971, the pork industry in Cuba was thriving. Then, on May 6, 1971, seemingly from nowhere, pigs in Havana were diagnosed with African swine fever. That's a disease that has nearly 100% kill rate. If a pig is infected with this disease, well, it's gonna die. By the end of the outbreak, more than 730,000 pigs had to be slaughtered, thrown into trenches, and then set on fire. African swine fever is indigenous to East Africa, and before this event, there had never been an outbreak anywhere in the Americas. And don't forget, the tension during this time between Cuba and the United States was extremely high. It was definitely a Cold War. And one of the only other places in the Americas that one could find this virus during this time? Yeah, you guessed it. Being studied by the scientists at Plum Island. And it wasn't just animals either. On Thursday, October 16, 1975, a lady named Polly Murray, living in Lyme, Connecticut, contacted the Connecticut State Health Department. She was convinced that a strange outbreak of some sort had taken place in her town. Neighbors were experiencing rashes, aching joints, and fevers. Murray had been hospitalized a few times herself, and 2 of her sons both had knee problems that were so bad they had to use crutches. Well, doctors from Yale University went out to investigate, and get this, they diagnosed 39 children and 12 adults with a disease called juvenile onset rheumatoid arthritis. Now, this disease is not contagious, so the odds that 51 people, all living in the same area, would develop this exact same affliction at the exact same time are astronomical. 6 years later, in 1980, a researcher named Willy Bergdorfer found that certain bacteria in specific ticks, remember them, were causing these ailments. He named the disease Lyme disease after the town that it was discovered in. By the way, Lyme, Connecticut? It's only 17 miles from Plum Island. These Lyme-infected ticks were very difficult to contain, and it wasn't long until this disease had spread out of the state of Connecticut over into Long Island. And by the 1990s, the entire east end of Long Island had the largest incident of Lyme disease in the country. It makes one wonder, doesn't it? When does conspiracy theory become conspiracy fact? Well, so many people believe that Plum Island was responsible for this disease that Congressman Mike Forbes got involved. In April of 1995, he and 2 news reporters, Carl Grossman and John McDonald, went to Plum Island unannounced. Now, Plum Island is, of course, an island, and in order to get to the laboratories on that island, one has to take a ferry. Well, the story has it that on this day in April, Mike Forbes, followed by these 2 other gentlemen, walked up to the ferry captain and he said, "Hi, I'm Congressman Mike Forbes, and you're going to take us to Plum Island." Well, it was reported that the ferryman suddenly got nervous, and he radioed ahead to the scientists there at the island before finally ferrying the 3 men over. The group found director Dr. Harley Moon in his office with a couple of other scientists.
They were very nervous. There were no PR guys around. It was just these scientists and no spin. Moon had 6 or 7 scientists come in and explain what they were doing. Forbes was in no mood to be snowed or softballed. To BS him would have been difficult. Meanwhile, McDonald and I were shooting questions at them too. It was their worst nightmare.
The congressman said that he had great concerns because the prevalence of Lyme disease in Long Island was the highest in the world, and the public at the time believed that Plum Island had something to do with it. The 2 newsmen reported that the congressman asked all sorts of questions, and along with everyone else, Dr. Moon seemed to get more and more nervous with each question. They said that his answers were vague, non-conclusive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Congressman. I wasn't the director when this tick problem began, Mr. Congressman." "I don't know, sir. We don't have that paperwork here on file, Mr. Congressman." Ultimately, no answers were found that day. But the congressman's visit to the island does make one think. Was there more to this conspiracy than just theory? Of course, duck plague, African swine fever, and Lyme disease are not the only outbreaks that are believed to have been connected to Plum Island. There are many, many more. These were just a random sampling that Amy got me for this video. Anthrax is said to have a connection with the island. Rift Valley fever also has a connection. The West Nile virus, the epidemic at the Bronx Zoo in 1999, and many others. It is indeed a long list, and we could be here for quite a while, but I bet you want to dive into some of the stranger stuff associated with Plum Island, don't you? Well, buckle in. The events that we're going to talk about next are events that really could have come straight out of a horror science fiction novel. On July 12, 2008, 3 ladies, Jenna Hewitt, Rachel Goldberg, and Courtney Fruin, found something otherworldly at the Ditch Plains Beach at the tip of Montauk in Long Island.
We were looking for a place to sit when we saw some people looking at something. We didn't know what it was. We joked that maybe it was something from Plum Island.
This, of course, became known as the Montauk Monster, and pictures of it can be found all over the internet. No doubt, many people wanted to inspect this creature, but for some strange reason, it just disappeared. When asked what happened to it, the only answer that Jenna could give was that some guy took it and then presumably he buried it in his backyard. William Wise, the director of Stony Brook University's Living Marine Resource Institute, looked at the photo of the so-called Montauk Monster, and he deemed that the creature was most probably a diseased dog or maybe a coyote which had just been out in the sea for way too long. And I guess that I would probably agree with him. But then, now this is weird, over the next few years, supposedly several more of these strange creatures washed up on neighboring shores. In the documentary, The Secrets of Plum Island, Unsealed Conspiracy, the commentator states that in 2009, another hybrid creature washed up on a beach in Connecticut, and then another in a different beach in 2011. Then, within the next year, 2 more washed up on the shores of Long Island. Now, I could believe that one strange creature could be a drowned dog that had just been out in the ocean for too long. But 5? And only in this area of the world? Just a stone's throw from Plum Island? Maybe. And of course, there are other rumors as well. Some people believe that there were areas of the island where mad scientists worked on splicing human, and this is crazy, insect DNA. Now, that's insane. Some of these rumors come from people who claim to have worked there on the island themselves, stating that scientists did indeed experiment on the DNA of humans, splicing and crossbreeding and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. One person said that there was a specific man whom they called the mad scientist because of the type of experiments that he would do. Some people say that they saw and heard things that made their skin crawl, and it was all there, recorded in all the files at Plum Island. Well, I wonder, were those the same files that Frances Demorest was burning? Remember, I opened this video by sharing that a lady named Frances Demorest was incinerating files in the basement of Plum Island in 1990. Frances Demorest began working at Plum Island from almost the time that it opened. She was hired on March 15, 1954. Reportedly, she was hired to be the island's librarian. See, there were several scientists that worked at Plum Island, and they used a lot of reference material. Frances was in charge of organizing and keeping track of all of this information. Well, over the years, she claims that she saw things that made her stomach churn. She stayed quiet for a long time, probably afraid of what would happen if she said anything. Well, finally, her conscience got the best of her, and she couldn't stay quiet any longer. Well, not knowing where else she could turn or who she could trust, she wrote a letter to Congressman George Hochbernecker. We're not sure whatever happened to that letter, and Hochbernecker never got involved publicly. But shortly after she wrote that letter, she felt the wrath of management, and she was ordered to take a bunch of those files down to the basement of Building 14 and burn it all. I wonder what information was in those files. I began this report by sharing that the United States government established the laboratories on Plum Island in 1954, and I also said that it closed down since then and has moved. No one is quite sure why, really. The scientists operated there for years, seemed like a good place, and whether they were doing legitimate work or something nefarious. Well, the laboratories were offshore, a safer place than, say, in the middle of the country. Well, the new facility is now over 1,300 miles to the west, and yes, it is smack dab in the middle of the United States. On May 14th, 2023, with a brand new name, the National Bio and Agro Defense Lab cranked up its facilities and began operations on Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. And they promise that nothing nefarious is going on there. This one was a really fun report to do, and I learned a lot from Amy's research. I hope you did too. There is, of course, a ton of information that we did not and could not put into this report. All types of conspiracies are wrapped around the laboratories that were there at Plum Island. So many so that we just actually had to pick some. There was talk of aliens and even human torture. But how much of it is true? Well, it is true that Eric Traub did in fact help to set it up, and over time he has come to be known as the founding father of the laboratories that were there on Plum Island. And it's also true that he came from Germany, where he did indeed work to engineer viruses that were used as biological weapons in World War II. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Plum Island was created to manufacture biological weapons, right? I mean, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense to hire Traub. He was an expert on the diseases that the laboratories on Plum Island were created to study and defend against. Perhaps many of the conspiracy theories sprang up just because Traub was involved. So what do you think? Was Plum Island really a place where crazy, nefarious stuff happened? Is the Montauk Monster real? Was it created there at the laboratories on Plum Island? Or was the lab exactly what the government always said that it was, just a facility to study and eradicate diseases? Please, let us know what you think in the comment section below. And if you want to see more videos like this one, then please help us build this channel. Watch every one of these videos all the way to the end. Subscribe, hit the bell for all notifications, like the video, and then of course share it with all of your friends. Thank you.